What if real, lasting prosperity had almost nothing to do with clever deals, sharp tricks, or being just a little bit willing to bend the truth when it counted, and everything to do with a small set of moral qualities so solid that no amount of bad luck could ever fully knock them down? What if the businesses and lives that actually endure generation after generation were being held up the whole time by something as simple and as buildable as 8 supporting pillars? Today we're exploring a compact, powerful little book called 8 Pillars of Prosperity, written by James Allen and first published in 1911. If the name James Allen sounds familiar, it's because he's the same writer behind the beloved classic As a Man Thinketh, and behind From Poverty to Power, a book that traced true prosperity back to the quality of our own inner thought life. In this later work, Allen takes that same core conviction and builds it out into something wonderfully concrete and practical. In his own preface, he tells us plainly that people commonly assume greater prosperity, whether for individuals or entire nations, can only come to political and social reconstruction. Allen rejects that assumption outright. Better laws and better social conditions, he insists, always follow a higher standard of morality among the individuals who make up a community, never the other way around. No law, he says, can hand prosperity to a person or a nation that has grown lax and decadent in the pursuit of real virtue. The moral virtues, in his view, are the very foundation and support of prosperity, the soul of all greatness, and they endure forever, while everything built without them remains, in the end, nothing more than an ephemeral dream. So let's step into this book together, starting exactly where Allen starts, with a rather bold claim that prosperity itself rests on a distinctly moral foundation. Most people, Allen tells us, assume prosperity actually rests on a moral foundation, on trickery, sharp practice, deception, and simple greed. You probably heard someone declare, quite casually, that no one can succeed in business without being at least a little dishonest. Allen calls this kind of statement superficial and thoughtless, revealing a total lack of understanding about how moral cause and effect actually work. It's a bit like expecting to sow one kind of seed and harvest something else entirely, or building a brick house on a quagmire and expecting it to stand. The natural world, he tells us, operates according to visible processes we can all observe and work with. The spiritual and moral world operates by the very same kind of law, just less visible, and because we can't see it directly, we too easily convince ourselves it doesn't really apply. But Allen insists these spiritual processes are every bit as reliable as the physical ones. Every process we see in matter, he says, has its exact counterpart in mind. He offers us a small, personal illustration here. Looking out his study window one blustery day, he notices a rook's nest built high in the swaying top of a tall tree. Despite the fierce wind whipping the treetop violently back and forth, the fragile little nest of sticks and hair remains perfectly secure, and the mother bird sitting on her egg shows no fear at all. Why? Because the bird instinctively built her nest in a fork of the branches rather than in the gap between two separate limbs, and shaped it in a circular pattern that offers maximum resistance to outside pressure. The nest obeys, without even knowing it, certain fixed structural principles. And because it obeys them, it holds firm no matter how the storm rages. In exactly the same way, Allen tells us, a business, a character, or a life can only stand securely when it's built according to certain fixed moral principles. And he identifies exactly 8 of these principles, 8 sturdy pillars, cemented together in a foundation of what he calls moral consistency, energy, economy, integrity. System, sympathy, sincerity, impartiality, and self-reliance. A business or a life built on the faultless practice of all eight, Allen tells us, would be so firm and enduring as to be genuinely invincible. Where these principles are entirely absent, on the other hand, there simply can't be any real, lasting success at all, only a kind of shiftless drifting through life. He makes an important clarification here before moving forward. He isn't writing about the rare, exceptional success of the great saint or the spiritual genius, who might deliberately choose poverty as a badge of honor. He's writing about the ordinary, practical prosperity that concerns the welfare and happiness of the average man and woman. The kind of prosperity that includes money, certainly, but reaches well beyond it into every corner of a person's daily life and circumstances. Let's begin, then, with the very first of these 8 supporting pillars, the pillar Allen calls energy. Energy, he tells us, is simply the working power behind every real achievement. It's what turns inert coal into fire, water into steam, ordinary talent into something that begins to approach genius. Energy is, in Allen's framework, a genuine moral virtue, and its opposing vice is laziness. The lazy man, he says with some real bite, is scarcely half alive. While he's still talking about how difficult a task looks, the energetic man has already gone out and done it, while the lazy man waits around for some perfect opportunity to arrive. The energetic man has already gone out and made use of half a dozen smaller ones along the way. Allen reminds us that the entire universe is really just a vast, tireless manifestation of energy and motion. When a person stops acting altogether, we call that death. And to whatever degree someone fails to genuinely act, Allen suggests they remain, in some real sense, that much closer to being dead already. There is no prosperity waiting for the lazy man. He warns, no true rest, no real refuge, because avoiding disciplined work paradoxically brings upon a person the very hardest lot of all. Interestingly, Allen tells us that misapplied energy, energy poured into the wrong ends, is still somehow better than no energy at all, echoing an old scriptural warning about lukewarm indifference being worse than either genuine heat or genuine cold. A person who pours real, vigorous energy into selfish or harmful pursuits will, sooner or later, run into enough difficulty and pain to the very intensity of their own efforts that they're forced to learn from the experience, and often end up redirecting that same fierce energy toward far better ends. The old proverb about the greater the sinner, the greater the potential saint, captures this idea perfectly. But raw energy alone isn't enough, Allen cautions. It has to be carefully controlled and conserved, not simply blasted out in noise and hurry. More haste, as the old saying goes, often means less actual speed. The loudest, most blustering people, Allen observes, usually accomplish the least. Working steam, after all, makes no sound at all. It's only the escaping, wasted steam that roars. The truly energetic man, once he's learned to conserve and direct his energy properly, becomes remarkably calm, and Allen paints a wonderful portrait of exactly this kind of person. Someone whose words are few but carry real weight, whose plans work like a well-balanced machine, who's never taken by surprise because he's already anticipated every likely difficulty in his own quiet reflection beforehand. Calmness, Allen tells us, isn't some lazy, disengaged placidity. It's actually the highest possible concentration of focused energy, the very opposite of the fussy, irritable person whose scattered attention repels others rather than drawing them in. Beneath this first pillar of energy, Allen identifies for supporting qualities holding it up: promptitude, the simple habit of being reliably on time and quick to act, which builds real trust in others; vigilance, a constant, watchful alertness that guards a mind against careless thoughtlessness and lets nothing harmful slip in unnoticed; industry, which Allen ties directly to genuine cheerfulness, since actively busy people rarely have the time or inclination to mope, brood, or dwell endlessly on their own troubles; and earnestness, which he describes, borrowing the words of an old teacher, as nothing less than the very path of immortality itself, since people who throw their whole heart into their work are, in a real sense, more fully alive than those merely going through the motions. From energy, Allen moves naturally to the second supporting pillar, economy. Nature herself, he tells us, knows no waste whatsoever. Every bit of organic material gets transformed and reused somewhere in her vast, continuous cycle. Human economy, in Allen's framework, works on exactly the same underlying principle, except that it operates through a genuinely moral quality rather than a purely chemical one. Financial economy, he suggests, is really just a small material fragment of a much larger, purely mental kind of economy. The truly wise person doesn't simply convert coins into savings. They convert unruly passions into settled intelligence, intelligence into workable principles, and principles into genuine wisdom, which then shows up as actions that are few in number but powerful in their real effect. True economy, Allen insists, always finds a sensible middle path between wasteful extravagance on one side and stingy, fearful hoarding on the other, and he applies the same balance principle across 7 distinct areas of ordinary daily life. Money, which should be spent thoughtfully enough to always leave a growing margin, rather than being either squandered carelessly or hoarded uselessly. Food, where the goal is genuine nourishment rather than either self-starving asceticism or self-destructive gluttony. Clothing, which should be clean, appropriate, and well-made, without sliding into either neglectful shabbiness or vain, showy excess. Recreation, valuable and necessary, but always meant to serve one's real work in life, rather than becoming an aimless, endless chase after amusement in its own right. Rest, enough to genuinely restore the body, but never so much that it slides into pampered indolence. Time, which Allen reminds us is the one resource every person genuinely possesses in exactly equal measure, and which, once wasted, can never be recovered or restored the way lost money sometimes can. And finally, energy itself, conserved with a careful, deliberate avoidance of destructive personal habits. Since Allen points out that the sheer amount of vital energy wasted every day through bad temper, worry, and self-indulgence would, if properly redirected, be more than enough to accomplish real greatness. Underneath this pillar of economy, Allen finds for supporting qualities: moderation, which avoids all extremes and simply refuses, on principle, any so-called moderate use of genuinely harmful things; efficiency, the natural result of properly concentrated energy, showing up as real, practical skill in whatever work a person actually does; resourcefulness, which flows directly out of efficiency, allowing a person to remain steady, adaptable, and unshaken no matter what setbacks come their way; and originality, which Allen describes as resourcefulness fully ripened into something like genuine genius, arising naturally whenever a person fully consecrates themselves to their own particular work rather than merely copying what everyone else around them happens to be doing. Now we come to the third of the 4 corner pillars, the one Allen considers absolutely essential to any lasting success at all: integrity. He tells us plainly, no such thing as striking a cheap, easy bargain with genuine prosperity. It has to be purchased with real moral force, not merely intelligent effort. Fraud, in whatever guise it appears, might produce a quick, feverish burst of apparent gain, but it inevitably collapses under its own weight, because nothing of any lasting value can ever actually be built without a fair and honest exchange behind it. Allen even extends this principle beyond the obvious swindler, pointing out that anyone anxiously scheming to get money without genuinely earning it through fair value in return is, in a very real sense, practicing the very same fraud, just perhaps a more socially acceptable version of it. He offers a wonderfully sharp line from the writer Carlyle here, defending the historical figure Muhammad against the old charge of being a mere impostor. An impostor, Carlyle insisted, couldn't even build a simple brick house, let alone found an entire religion, because dishonesty simply has no genuine tools or materials of which to build anything durable at all. Integrity, to be genuinely strong, Allen insists, has to run through absolutely every part of a person's life, without exception. A single compromise, however small or seemingly justified by circumstance, undermines the whole structure. The person who works with the very same care and diligence whether or not their employer happens to be watching will quickly rise, while the person who only performs when being observed will just as quickly find themselves stuck in the barren wasteland of chronic unemployment. And crucially, Allen reminds us that lying or cheating is never actually necessary, no matter how urgently circumstances might seem to demand in the moment. And the person genuinely rooted in integrity understands this so completely that they're simply never tempted by the false shortcut in the first place. Rectitude, Allen tells us, leads straight toward prosperity through 4 clear, successive steps. First, honest conduct earns other people's genuine confidence. Second, that confidence naturally grows into real trust. Third, trust that's never once violated builds a solid, lasting reputation. And fourth, that reputation spreads steadily outward, bringing real and lasting success along with it. Dishonesty, predictably, produces the exact opposite chain of events: mistrust, suspicion, a damaged reputation, and eventual failure. For supporting qualities uphold this pillar of integrity. Honesty itself, the surest and most direct path toward genuine success. Fearlessness, since the person who has honestly fulfilled every one of their obligations genuinely has nothing left to hide, and therefore nothing left to fear. Purposefulness, the natural strength of character that comes from always weighing the deeper moral consequences of one's actions rather than merely chasing short-term convenience. And invincibility, that remarkable, settled protection which comes only from integrity so complete and so consistent that it simply can't be undermined at any single point by slander, suspicion, or attack. The fourth and final corner pillar Allen describes is system, the simple but powerful principle of order that makes genuine confusion impossible. In the vast natural universe, he reminds us everything sits precisely in its proper place, running more smoothly than the most perfectly engineered machine ever could. Disorder in a person's own affairs, correspondingly, quietly destroys both their work and their prosperity. No truly large business or organization, Allen tells us, has ever been built without careful, deliberate system, since complex structures, whether in nature or in human enterprise, are always built up through painstaking attention to countless individual details. Disorderly people Alan observes with real practical insight, wastes an absolutely enormous amount of both time and energy simply hunting for misplaced things, and the resulting irritation and frustration drains away vital energy that could otherwise go toward real, productive achievement. The genuinely systematic person, by beautiful contrast, can accomplish an astonishing amount of work with real ease and remarkably little visible strain, because everything they need sits precisely where they left it, ready for immediate, confident use. For supporting qualities, uphold this pillar of system. Readiness, that alert responsiveness which allows a person to immediately grasp and skillfully handle whatever situation happens to arise. Accuracy, since genuine precision depends entirely on a properly disciplined and orderly mind. And habitual carelessness in either speech or action quietly undermines a person's usefulness and reliability. Utility, the practical habit of pursuing genuinely useful, achievable ends rather than getting endlessly lost in unproductive theorizing. And comprehensiveness, that rare, almost masterly capacity to hold an entire complex web of interconnected details firmly and clearly in mind all at once, which Alan considers a trait shared by every truly great inventor, author, and organizer throughout history. Alan pauses here, having laid out these first four corner pillars, to make an important observation. A person who fully masters just these first four, energy, economy, integrity, and system, will already achieve real, lasting success in whatever work they've chosen to pursue. The remaining four pillars, he tells us, belong to an even higher, more refined moral plane, and it's to these that he now turns. If you've been enjoying this deep dive into Alan's practical philosophy so far, go ahead and hit subscribe now, so you'll be right here as we move into these next four pillars, the ones Alan considers even more elevated and even more beautiful than the sturdy foundational four we've just covered. The fifth pillar Alan describes is sympathy, and he's quick to draw a very careful line between real sympathy and its cheap, hollow imitation. Real sympathy, he insists, has nothing to do with shallow, sentimental gushing over some distant tragedy, while treating the people right in your own household with coldness or cruelty. He borrows a sharp line from Emerson here, warning against the kind of person whose loud, dramatic tenderness for suffering people 1,000 miles away conveniently masks a hard, uncharitable heart right at home. Genuine sympathy, Alan tells us, is a deep, quiet, and remarkably consistent tenderness expressed through steady, self-forgetful, gentle conduct, not through occasional emotional outbursts. It arises from real love, while its absence, Alan suggests, arises from simple egotism, the mistaken belief that we exist entirely separate from everyone around us, with entirely separate interests. The person of true sympathy, Alan tells us beautifully, becomes something like a composite being, capable of genuinely seeing a situation through many different eyes at once rather than only their own. This kind of deep sympathy, he's careful to note, usually only ripens in someone who has personally suffered, and suffered deeply enough that their own selfishness and thoughtlessness have been thoroughly burned away by the experience. Far from being some soft, impractical virtue, Alan insists that sympathy plays a genuinely important role even in ordinary business dealings, since people naturally prefer working with those who carry a warm, kindly nature over those who come across as cold and forbidding, all else being equal. For supporting qualities, uphold this pillar of sympathy. Kindness, which Alan insists must be a steady, permanent quality, rather than some flickering emotional impulse that depends entirely on how we happen to be treated in return. Generosity, the natural, open-handed companion of genuine kindness, since Alan reminds us that giving is every bit as important to discipline as earning, and that refusing to give eventually chokes off our own capacity to receive. Gentleness, which he calls something close to divine, since it can only be reached through real self-discipline and hard-won experience. And insight, the natural gift of sympathy, since genuinely understanding another person, Alan argues, requires real emotional experience rather than mere clever argument, which only ever schemes across the surface. From sympathy, Alan turns to the sixth pillar, sincerity, which he considers absolutely central to the entire fabric of human society itself. If falseness were somehow universal, he tells us, the resulting universal mistrust would tear society apart entirely, since human life depends fundamentally on our deep, largely unspoken trust in one another. Even ordinary commerce, Alan points out, rests on an enormous foundation of simple trust, since payment for goods is rarely demanded before delivery, which only works because most people genuinely do meet their obligations. Insincerity, Alan warns, quietly undermines every other virtue a person might otherwise possess, making even genuine talent seem hollow and untrustworthy. He offers a wonderful little phrase here that's stuck with readers for over a century. People instinctively sense whether someone rings true, the way you test a coin by its distinctive sound, and this inner sense, Alan insists, is remarkably difficult to fool for very long, because deception ultimately deceives no one quite so thoroughly as the person practicing it. For supporting qualities, uphold this pillar of sincerity. Simplicity, which Alan equates with genuine naturalness, the same simple, unself-conscious quality we admire so freely in the natural world. Attractiveness, which flows directly out of that same simplicity, since Alan insists real personal magnetism can never actually be purchased or faked, only genuinely embodied. Penetration, the sincere person's remarkable natural ability to see straight through any pretense or disguise in others. And power, since the person whose character carries real, settled truth behind it becomes, almost without trying, a genuinely moving and lasting influence on everyone they encounter. The seventh pillar Alan describes is impartiality, which he defines simply as genuine freedom from prejudice. Prejudice, he tells us, quietly piles up all sort of imaginary obstacles in a person's path, obstacles that dissolve the moment that prejudice is finally set aside. The partisan, wrapped up entirely in defending their own fixed conclusion, never really searches for truth at all, only for victory in the argument. The truly impartial thinker, by contrast, patiently examines every side of a question with genuine calm, and Alan suggests that this rare, hard-won quality has historically belonged to the very greatest figures in human history, the kind of person whose influence quietly reshapes the whole world long after their own lifetime has ended. For supporting qualities, uphold this pillar of impartiality. Justice, the simple, consistent habit of giving and receiving genuinely fair value in every transaction, rather than trying to gain some small hidden advantage. Patience, which Alan calls the brightest jewel in the impartial character, an unshakable gentleness that holds steady even under real provocation. Calmness, since Alan insists a person simply cannot be genuinely impartial while their own personal feelings remain agitated and disturbed. And wisdom, that many-sided capacity to adapt thoughtfully to other people's needs and perspectives without ever once sacrificing one's own core moral principles in the process. And finally, we arrive at the eighth and last pillar, the one Alan calls self-reliance. He opens this chapter by pointing his readers directly toward Emerson's famous essay of the very same name, calling it perhaps the most bracingly honest essay ever written on the subject. Allen is quick to draw an important distinction here, though. Self-reliance, in his framework, is nothing at all like simple conceit or vanity. The timid, apologetic person who's constantly afraid of being laughed at is, in Allen's view, not yet a fully realized person at all, still leaning on the approval of others rather than standing on their own honest inner strength. True self-reliance, he insists, is fully compatible with real humility. In fact, the deepest, most complete form of self-reliance is always found paired closely together with genuine humility, never with arrogance. For supporting qualities, uphold this final pillar of self-reliance: decision, the simple, settled confidence to actually know your own business and act on that knowledge without endless, draining hesitation. Steadfastness, an unwavering loyalty to one's own genuinely chosen principles, regardless of whatever pressure or temptation might come along, to test that commitment. Dignity, which Allen tells us arises not from vain self-love at all, but from real, quiet self-sacrifice and unshakable adherence to some fixed, central principle larger than one's own passing personal feelings. And independence, the simple, honest capacity to genuinely support oneself through one's own honest labor, rather than depending indefinitely on others while contributing nothing meaningful in return. Having walked us carefully through all 8 pillars, Allen brings the whole book to a close by stepping back to look at the completed structure as a whole, what he calls, quite beautifully, the Temple of Prosperity. He's careful here to explain why he's deliberately avoided giving any specific, detailed instructions about actual business practices, prices, contracts, or particular money-making schemes throughout the entire book. Details, he tells us, are genuinely infinite in number and constantly changing, while principles remain few and eternal and entirely unchanging. A person who has truly grasped these underlying moral principles doesn't need to anxiously worry over every individual detail of their particular trade or circumstance, because the principles themselves naturally illuminate and resolve those details as they arise. True prosperity, Allen tells us in his closing pages, is first and always a spirit, an inner attitude of mind, a genuine moral power, which only afterward manifests outwardly as material abundance, comfort, and joy. There is, he insists quite directly, no actual joy located in money itself, or in property, or in any material possession considered purely on its own. The joy has to already exist within the person, or it exists nowhere at all. A truly wealthy man who is nonetheless miserable, Allen argues, isn't genuinely wealthy in any meaningful sense. He's simply been burdened with money, luxury, and idle leisure to become, in his own restless hands, little more than instruments of quiet self-torture. So Allen closes by briefly recapitulating all 8 pillars once more. Energy as strenuous, unremitting effort. Economy as the wise conservation of both capital and character. Integrity as unwavering honesty regardless of personal cost. System as the ordering of every detail, so the mind is freed from needless strain. Sympathy as genuine generosity and gentleness. Sincerity as being genuinely the same person in private as in public. Impartiality as simple fairness that never favors the self over others, and self-reliance as standing firmly on one's own fixed, inward principles rather than on external circumstances that could be swept away at any moment. Allen leaves us with one final, memorable image. Just as the great Temple of Solomon, according to the old account, was built so quietly and so carefully that no hammer or iron tool was ever heard ringing out during its entire construction. So too, he tells us, is the true inner temple of prosperity built quietly, patiently, invisibly, brick by moral brick, stone by moral stone, until at last it stands complete, secure, and genuinely unshakable. So here we are at the close of James Allen's 8 Pillars of Prosperity. What he's really given us here is a remarkably practical answer to an age-old question, whether it's genuinely possible to be both a good person and a truly successful one. Allen's answer, argued patiently across every single page of this book, is that these were never actually two separate things to begin with. Real, lasting prosperity was never a reward handed out despite our character. It was always meant to be a natural, inevitable expression of it. Build your energy. Guard your integrity. Bring order to your days. Treat others with real sympathy. Stay genuinely sincere. Weigh things fairly. And stand quietly and firmly on your own 2 feet. Do this consistently, and Allen promises the roof of a truly lasting prosperity will settle naturally, securely, into place above you. If this exploration of James Allen's 8 Pillars has given you something worth carrying forward, go ahead and subscribe now, so you're already here for whatever we build together next. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Until next time, build steadily, build honestly, and build to last.